Hi there guys, welcome to the DJI channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. And in this video we're gonna do something a little bit different, but kind of the same. Yeah. So this is the GepRC TinyRadio, and it's the ELRS version. There's also a black version which is FrSky compatible, D16 I think. I haven't really looked into that version much, as it wasn't interesting to me. But yeah, this is the ELRS version, and it's cheap or inexpensive. You tell me. Yeah, I think we're gonna find out in this video whether it's cheap or inexpensive. Right, so, and it's a no-frills radio. Not a whole lot of features. It's also pretty small, but not super small. I'll put it up against a couple of transmitters in terms of size. But in this video we're gonna see if it's at least worth what it costs, or maybe even more. My hope is that because of its simplicity, it's easy to use for beginners or people that don't like OpenTX or HTX, and that do want the performance of ELRS, which this should provide. And at the time I'm shooting this part of the video, I haven't flown with it yet. So yeah, let's find out together if it's worth anything. Here we go.
You serious?
Alrighty guys, so as you can tell, I'm starting this review with a little bit of a flight, just to well, first of all show you that the radio actually works, but I'll also tell you what I think of the flight experience with this radio. And obviously I'm used to more expensive, let's say, radios with the full Hall effect gimbals, aluminium and 110 bearings and such. So as you can tell, it flies. And as you can also see from the link in the description down below, this radio costs approximately, what, 80 to 90 euros, depending on when you look at the product pages, right? They go up and down on a daily basis. So check it out. And that makes this, again, an inexpensive radio. Not even super duper cheap, but definitely inexpensive. And so, does the radio feel like an inexpensive, cheap radio? Yeah, it feels light and it feels plasticky. However, the actual sticks are metal and adjustable. I'll show you that up close in a couple of minutes. But if that wouldn't have been the case, I would have had to either replace the sticks, or I wouldn't be able to fly with this radio. Simply because my fingers are quite long. However, the sticks are adjustable and metal, aluminium probably. Well, actually, I don't know. And that makes the radio perfectly usable for me. The radio is still small. Maybe you can see the radio. I'll show you my hands on the radio up close in a couple of minutes in the studio as well. But yeah, I have a what you'd call a loose grip on the radio, which is fine because the radio is also light. It is actually quite relaxing this way. Also quite different from my other radios. I actually prefer heavy radios. So it took some adjustment from me. This is the third time I'm flying with this radio. I took a couple of flights off camera to get familiar with the radio a little bit, and also to see whether it works and if there were things I needed to definitely mention in this first test flight. So the sticks are also very supple and not necessarily in a good way. Yeah, they have very little resistance. Yeah, so maybe you like that, maybe you don't. I prefer a little bit more resistance, but you get used to it. I definitely got used to it in maybe half a flight. Oops, I accidentally... And we continue as if nothing happened. Yeah, so I accidentally disarmed my quadcopter. And why? Well, because my arm switches in a different position than what I'm used to. Yeah, well, actually it's in the same position, but the radio itself is very, very much smaller. So, yeah, okay. Okie dokie. So, range. I can't really, I must say, test the range of this this radio, as my FPV feed would cut out much sooner. I've tested it with a car, so with a friend of mine drive my quadcopter away, and after 5 kilometers we said, well, that's more than enough. I mean, this is a cheap radio. Will you be using this radio? Will you rely on this radio for your long range endeavors? I have a hard time believing that. Suffice to say, the range is more than adequate and more than you have any right of asking of a radio in this price range. Yeah, no, the range is basically more or less the same as in other ELRS radios with 500 milliwatts of output power. Yeah, actually that's the same as on my Radio Master radio, also 500 milliwatts maximum. So I am guessing that this radio will have the same range as my very much more expensive Radio Master radio. Okay, so this is again my third flight with the radio, and I am actually very much used to the radio by now. I have full confidence somehow in the radio. It hasn't let me down at all, and the flight experience is quite nice, even though, yeah, the gimbals are a little small, and the radio is also new, right? I have no way of knowing what the radio will be like in, say, 2 years. But at this price, it's almost a dispensable radio. Okay, so it works. And let's actually get back to the studio, and I'll show you the radio up close, tell you a little more, and also tell you what I really think if you should order this radio, who is it for, and things like that. Let's get back to the studio. Here we go. So guys, this is how you'd receive your GepRC TinyRadio. Well, actually some shops will sell you the radio without the case, and some other shops will only sell the radio as you see it here in a semi-hard case pouch, which is nice, and it costs approximately 80 euros with pouch. So if you open up the pouch, you see the radio with some gimbal protectors, which is definitely nice for shipping. And okay, when you receive the radio, actually the antenna won't be screwed on, it will be in the box over here. And I have altered the case a little bit so that the radio fits in the case with the antenna on. I don't really understand why you'd want to take off your antenna every time you fly, right? In my humble opinion, you wouldn't want that. So again, I changed the case a little bit and now it fits. And you can add some accessories in the case if you want to. So nice case, and then you've got a tiny radio, an ELRS radio at that. Oh, and you also get an instructions manual, which can also be found online. And you get some decals from GepRC, which is always nice. So the tiny ELRS radio from GepRC. Is it tiny? Well, my hands are pretty big. So you can, well, for scale, you can see that the radio is pretty small, putting it next to another radio, like the TBS Mamba radio. And this isn't a huge radio by any means, it's already a reasonably small radio. But yeah, the GepRC radio is definitely pretty small. Also, these gimbals on the Mamba radio aren't, well, they are normal size, if you want to call them normal. So gimbals are pretty small on this tiny radio as well. What does the stick feel like? Well, I showed you that I could definitely fly with this radio, but the throws, and that's definitely a downside of a tiny radio like this, the throws of these sticks are significantly smaller. Yeah, definitely I could sense that my precision, your resolution, your mechanical resolution is smaller on this small radio because the gimbals are that small. Right, so yeah, that might be a downside of a small radio. However, if you have small hands, if you want to have your children fly drones, then that might be a benefit. An even bigger difference in radio sizes here, of course. This is a Radio Master TX16S, which is a big radio, right? A full-size radio, if you want to call it that. And you can see another difference between these radios, a screen, and obviously that Mamba radio also has a screen, even though it's a little smaller. The GepRC radio doesn't have a screen at all. The only real user interface is, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that, but it has an LED bar over here which can flicker and which can show a couple of different colors, but that's it. And so yeah, that might be a downside. However, the radio being small could be an upside for you, a benefit if you have small hands. Not having a big screen and a complicated user interface like this radio here might be a benefit to you as well. Depends on you, right? Maybe you simply want to turn on your radio and fly. Don't have any choices really to configure. Well, you can configure a couple of things on this radio, but very few. Maybe that is an upside to you. It is super duper simple, right? You can't do anything wrong more or less with this radio. You can't mess up the configuration. If you turn this radio on, nothing about the setup has any chance of being out of place or being wrong. But obviously there are lots of people that like big screens and complicated, flexible user interfaces which can do a whole lot for them as well. The funny thing is actually that the entire ELRS thing has facilitated radios like this, right? Cheap, inexpensive, small radios, but that also work well. Right, the ELRS setup, the ELRS systems work very well, very reliable, long range, fast. Really an unusual combination, if you will. Cheap, but still very reliable. Okay, let me tell you a couple of things about this radio. It has 4 switches, as you can tell over here. Metal switches, they are normal switches. And over here you've got a 1-2 position switch, which is always channel 5. Then you've got a 3 position switch, which is always channel 6. Then you've got another 3 position switch which is always channel 7. Then you've got another 3 position switch which is always channel 9. And by the way, if you were wondering why I accidentally disarmed my quadcopter, well, I held the radio like this and I got my arming switch over here, right? Channel 5. It must be channel 5 on ELRS. So I rested my finger against the switch and click. Yeah. It hadn't happened in my previous slides, but yeah, now it has happened. I can see that yeah, especially if you clamshell the radio like this. Also, I'm a thumb flyer. Pinch wouldn't be, well, pinch. The radio would kinda, I think, be on the small side for pinchers. You don't really have a good grip on it, to be perfectly honest. On the flip side, like I mentioned before, these are aluminium sticks and you can extend them. If I wouldn't have been able to extend these sticks, I would have again had to replace them. Okay, then, you got an antenna obviously and a USB-C port, yay, thank you very much. And that can be used for firmware updates or charging the radio and charging the lithium-ion batteries, which don't come with the radio, by the way. But it's great to see that you can charge the radio from USB. And you got a trainer port over here. A trainer port? That's weird. Maybe that's an audio port. I'll put that up on screen for you. I'm not completely sure. Okay, at the back of the radio you've got two other switches, which aren't switches for flight operation. It's a setup switch which you need to hold on to when you turn on the radio if you want to change the firmware, for instance, and a bind button. I have actually put my binding phrase on this radio, so I've updated the firmware with a binding phrase so that I can use this radio or my other ELRS radios and I don't have to rebind anything. Great, multi-bind, right? So, okay, you do have some grip over here, but it's not rubbery at all, it's simple hard plastic. And you got a battery bay at the bottom. It takes two lithium-ion 18650 cells, which don't come with radio. The radio does come with a tray for two 18650s. So guys, let me give you my closing thoughts on this GepRC TinyRadio, the ELRS version that is. Again, I have no experience, I've never seen the non-ELRS, the black version, which is probably ever-sky compatible. I don't think that's as much of an interesting radio as this one is, because again, it's cheap, but still reliable and long range and fast. This version, the ELRS option. So my thoughts on this radio, I actually ordered it because I was interested to see if it would work. I had good confidence that, ELRS, that it would work, but is it flyable for people with, adults with bigger hands? And it is. Yeah, so for instance, I could use this radio as a backup. I would definitely not use this radio as my primary radio. If I hadn't had ELRS setups yet, I could have ordered this radio to try ELRS. So that is an option. If you have no prior experience with ELRS and you want to try it, then this is an inexpensive option and it actually works. It's even easy to set up. There is hardly any setup. Yeah. Okay, so it is possible to update the firmware. It is possible with a special program from GepRC to invert the switches, right? To change whether, for instance, this is armed or this is armed. And that's the entire setup that you can do on this radio. And again, that might be a benefit to you, it might be a downside to you. Second thing, the size. It is definitely very small. So maybe you have small hands, or again, you're looking for a radio for your children, then this is a good option. It is small and it's reliable and it's easy to set up. You can't screw up anything about the setup, more or less. And third thing, it is inexpensive, as mentioned. So that's always nice. Now, point of note about that, for like 10 euros more you can have like a jumper radio. So it's not like 55 or 60 euros inexpensive. 8 euros, not super duper cheap. Right, so that might sway people to a jumper radio. However, that jumper radio or that iFlight radio or that Radio Master radio would have you end up with a radio with a complicated user interface. Some people will like that, I personally like that, but a lot of people want a simple radio which will simply work. And again, on this radio you can't mess up basically anything. Oh, before I forget, this lanyard hook is situated a little bit too high on the radio. It will hang like so, towards you a little bit. Not optimal. Yeah. Okay, so it is also light and it doesn't feel super duper cheap. So it being plasticky wasn't really a downside to me. Okay, so that's my thoughts on this radio. So would I recommend it? Again, if you are looking for a small radio, definitely. it works and it's inexpensive. If you are looking for a way into ELRS and if you're not sure yet if ELRS is the thing for you, this is an inexpensive entry into it, and with that you can't mess up anything with this radio. So if it doesn't work, if your setup doesn't work with this radio, you're doing something else wrong, right? So it definitely eliminates causes of issues in that way. So yeah, however, if you want to be a little bit more flexible, have more configuration options, I'd look for an inexpensive jumper or radio master or iFlight radio. And that's it. I will actually do a short little video about the radio on how to change the firmware on this radio. Again, I flashed firmware onto this radio so that it has my binding phrase. That's the only reason why I flashed firmware onto this radio. But if you want to know how to do that on this radio, then I'll have a short video on that in the coming days. And that's my take on the GepRC Tiny ELRS radio. If you are left with questions, hit me up a comment down below. Catch you on the next video. Bye bye.